All right, let's go back to March the 4th. Remember, President Trump, he was ridiculed by the alt-left propaganda, destroy Trump media. Why? He tweeted out that members of his transition team had been wiretapped by the Obama administration. But tonight, there is a damning piece of tape circulating that could vindicate President Trump. Now, this clip we're going to show you is from March 2nd. It's from an MSNBC interview with Dr. Evelyn Farkas. Now, she served in the Obama administration from 2012 through 2015 as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. Now, this clip from the interview earlier this month, it could prove the Obama administration was very much involved in the surveillance of Trump transition team members. Wow. Watch this.
I was urging my former colleagues and frankly speaking, the people on the Hill, it was more actually aimed at telling the Hill people, get as much information as you can, get as much intelligence as you can before President Obama leaves the administration, because I had a fear that somehow that information would disappear with the senior people who left. So it would be hidden away in the bureaucracy, that the Trump folks, if they found out how we knew what we knew about the Trump staff's dealing with Russians, that they would try to compromise those sources and methods, meaning we would no longer have access to that intelligence. So I became very worried because not enough was coming out into the open, and I knew that there was more. We have very good intelligence on Russia. So then I had talked to some of my former colleagues, and I knew that they were trying to also help get information to the Hill.
All right, this is very, very important. Let's break down what Evelyn Farkas is actually saying here. And while I'm doing this, by the way, I want you to remember very crucial words, 4 words: surveillance, unmasking, intelligence leaking. Now, first, pay close attention. She's admitting here surveillance of Trump and his associates and transition team took place. Listen to this.
It was more actually aimed at telling the Hill people, get as much information as you can, get as much intelligence as you can before President Obama leaves the administration, because I had a fear that somehow that information would disappear with the senior people.
All right. Now, what is the information she's actually talking about? Now, obviously, Farkas is referring to surveilled information on the Trump transition team. Listen next as she admits that there was unmasking, in other words, revealing the identities of those Trump team members.
That the Trump folks, if they found out how we knew what we knew about the Trump staff's dealing with Russians, that they would try to compromise those sources and methods, meaning we would no longer have access to that intelligence.
Pretty blockbuster. Third, she admits that intelligence leaking was taking place. By the way, that could very well be a felony.
I became very worried because not enough was coming out into the open, and I knew that there was more. We have very good intelligence on Russia. So then I had talked to some of my former colleagues, and I knew that they were trying to also help get information to the Hill.
All right, let's go backwards. Surveillance, unmasking, intelligence leaking, all acknowledged in that tape by Evelyn Farkas. Now, for days, we have been asking on this program, who knew what, when, and where? So, did Obama officials commit a crime here? And how did Evelyn Farkas, a former, relatively low-ranking Obama administration official, how did she know about all this surveillance? Now, that brings us to another big story tonight. For weeks, right here on this program, Sarah Carter, John Solomon from Circa News, they have been doing excellent reporting on the surveillance story. Now, they uncovered the existence of an FBI investigation into a server that was being utilized by Trump Tower. By the way, that's where the campaign was. They also discovered a FISA warrant that allowed federal officials to capture Trump team communications. Now, prior to the president taking office, all this occurred. Now they have another bombshell report, and it shows high-ranking officials with direct access to President Obama may have had access to unmasked federal surveillance of the Trump transition and their team members, and may have briefed President Obama himself about the information they were collecting on then President-elect Trump. Now, my prediction is that as each day goes by, more and more information will be becoming available, and soon we're going to have the answer to these very important questions. Joining us now with their explosive report from Circa News, Sarah Carter, John Solomon. Thank you, John, especially for making a rare appearance. Sarah's been doing all the heavy lifting on the show.
She has indeed.
This is very important. Now, how is it that Evelyn Farkas, Sarah, who left the administration, is talking specifically about surveillance? It seems like she's admitting the surveillance that you've been reporting on and John's been reporting on. that took place of Trump transition team members. She's admitting that they unmasked them because they're Trump transition team members. And it seems like she's talking about, well, we got to get it to our friends that they're A, politicizing intelligence, and B, talking about leaking intelligence. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, with the story that John and I broke today with regards to how the Obama administration loosened a lot of the regulations that protected the privacy of Americans. I mean, this is going back all the way to 2011. Remember, everyone thought for a long time, and once it was revealed that in January, when Obama expanded Executive Order 12333 to all the agencies, everybody was just focused on that. But nobody was focusing on what happened before that. And I think with what John and I were able to show is that, look, it didn't happen just in January. That expanded it even further into all 16 agencies. But in 2011, there was already the unraveling of what we consider our privacy rights. And then again in 2015, it happened again. So they were already set up to look at these unredacted, unmasked transcripts between Americans and foreign officials, or foreigner to foreigner, that we're talking about Americans.
All right,
and I think that's a huge revelation.
Because I think this is important. John, I'll throw this to you because Evelyn also served as an advisor to Hillary Clinton in the 2016 presidential campaign. According to one report, was up for a position if she had won. So she's out in 2015. We're talking about 2016 here. How would somebody that was once a rather low-level official, with no offense to her, she's serving her country, how would she have known that there was surveillance of Trump and his transition team? If you break down, if they found out what we knew about the Trump staff dealing with the Russians, wow, how would she possibly know that outside of government now?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And her appearance raises more questions than we have answers to right now. But it's possible the surveillance started earlier when she was a Russia expert inside the Pentagon in 2015. That's something we have to look at. It's possible someone...
John,
yep.
What you just said, they could have been surveilling in 2015?
Certainly possible. Listen, we don't know, so I don't want to leap to any conclusions, but that's one possibility. Another possibility is someone passes information along to her. It could be some of the information she has isn't classified at all, though she used the word intelligence, so that's a red flag, right? I think her appearance on that show is going to raise a lot of questions, and we may not know the answers to them for a little bit of time, but there's certainly some important questions that she's raised in that appearance.
Let me go through a quick bullet point list and ask if you both agree. Do you both agree she's admitting surveillance at least of the Trump transition team and the president-elect took place? She seems to confirm that. Do you both agree with that?
I'd say, listen, there are many different ways you can find out what's going on overseas. Surveillance is one of them. Wiretaps is one of them. Intercepts is one of them. Sometimes human intelligence is another one. A foreign government comes in and said, hey, we found this out about an American.
If they found out how we knew what we knew, that would compromise sources and methods.
Right.
That's
but sources and methods could be humans, too. It doesn't necessarily mean surveillance or wiretaps. It could be one of many different ways.
And it's also
it may be all ways. It may be all of those ways.
That's right.
They may have utilized all of those ways.
Okay, so it seems to acknowledge surveillance took place. Had to. How else would she know this information? Some sort of surveillance. That's the only way that they'd get that. All right. She's also revealing when she talks about if they found out how we knew, what we knew about the Trump staff dealing with the Russians, doesn't that mean some unmasking took place of some kind? Sarah?
I think so. I mean, I think we already showed through our reporting that unmasking took place. And what we know for a fact is that with Flynn, and it's on the separate, investigation, his name was leaked. So Lieutenant General Mike Flynn's name was leaked out there. So we know for a fact unmasking took place. But what unmasking was it? Who was unmasked? And who authorized the unmasking?
She's saying the Trump staff, what we knew about the Trump staff.
Yes, but who in the Trump staff?
How would they possibly know unless somebody's leaking? Now, then she talks about, I knew it was important. I was urging my colleagues on the Hill to keep this information, gather this information. Who are these colleagues? Do they have security clearances? Should they have access to this information? That would be, if you leak any intelligence, even if it's to a member of Congress, wouldn't that still serve as a felony under the Espionage Act, John?
If it was transmitted through channels that were not authorized, absolutely there could be criminal conduct. If it wasn't classified, there may not be. There's just so many questions we don't know, but I will say that her appearance raised more questions. And I talked to some people on Capitol Hill late today that were telling us they have the same questions. They're going to start asking their colleagues, the Democrats on the Hill, were you taking information from this woman and her friends?
Is this possible? Now, we all can go back to Watergate. And by the way, number one, it proves Trump was right. There was surveillance. We now have confirmed through you guys, James Roseneer, Fox News, and I think this also backs us up. Trump was surveilled. He was right in his tweet that he sent out that day. If we go back to Watergate and we look at Watergate, wasn't that about a break-in, about a political opponent? Didn't that become a big scandal and a president resigned? My question to both of you, do you think based on where this story is now, this has the potential of being even bigger? If we're talking about surveillance, unmasking, leaking intelligence, even bigger than Watergate? Is that a possibility where this ends up? Sarah.
Yes, I do. I think so. I think it's something that needs to be investigated, and I think we need to look at what civil liberties here have been violated and how far this expansion, these regulations have been loosened to allow people. I mean, even in our story today, we talked about top Obama aides viewing unmasked intercepts on a routine basis. What were they viewing? Why were they viewing it? Why did they need to view these? Some may be legitimate, but if we find out that they were just viewing conversations between, even then, President Trump and other foreign officials and members of his team.
That's illegal if you don't have a warrant for President Trump, even if it was picked up incidentally. John, how big does this story potentially get?
You know, a couple weeks ago when Democrats were throwing Watergate around, I said the same thing on your show, which is, listen, Watergate had a lot of crimes in it. We're a long way from proving crimes yet. But I do think that there's
wait a minute. Don't you think a crime committed with releasing the intelligence information on General Flynn, isn't that a felony?
We have a leak investigation, but Watergate was much larger than leaks, as you know. In fact, the one leak that made Watergate, a lot of people herald as a great moment. We're just a long way from there yet. But listen, there are important issues that need to be answered here. And the story that we broke today, if you're a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, you should be really concerned how easy it is today that large numbers of members of the government, for a very low threshold, can ask the NSA, hey, if you intercepted John Solomon or Sean Hannity, could you unmask his name? Because we're trying to understand this intelligence. It used to be that was a very rare moment. When you look at the rules that Obama changed in 2011 and through 2017, it is very easy now for the intelligence community to get American's name and see what they were intercepted.
We got to take a break. We continue with Circa News's Sarah Carter and John Solomon. All right. So your piece today, let's start at the beginning. As his presidency drew to a close, Barack Obama's top aides routinely reviewed intelligence reports gleaned from the National Security Agency's incidental intercepts of Americans abroad, taking advantage of the rules that their boss relaxed starting in 2011 to help government better fight terrorism, espionage, etc. Were they using, under the guise, Sarah, of protecting the country and legitimate surveillance of America's enemies, friends, foes? Were they doing that, using that as a ruse to tap into Donald Trump's transition team in Trump Tower, do you think? Is that a possibility?
I think that's the concern that a lot of the sources that have spoken to John and I have. I mean, their concern is, look, we want to be able to go after the terrorists. We want to be able to find these hackers and cyber espionage and counter espionage. We need this. But are people using this as a backdoor to actually spy on Americans? Is this being politicized? Is this political espionage? And that's the question that we all need to be asking. And we all need to kind of understand that civil liberties here are being, in a sense, being violated if what our sources are saying is true.
John, your reaction?
Yeah, I agree. Listen, there was one intelligence official we talked to who was, defending the intelligence community. But even he said, listen, you know what? We know that this could be this unmasking could be used for abusive or political purposes. And that's why we try to put strict rules in place. But when those rules get loosened, the potential goes up for abuse or political espionage. And those are the questions I think the Hill and the intelligence community is going to have to answer.
Based on, your big report today, this is a big blockbuster story. I mean, you're saying that Obama loosened the rules. Now, this is before he modified Executive Order 12333.
5 years before.
5 years before, so he was lessening the rules. And then I've got to ask this question again. I mean, here you have this Evelyn Farkas going back when you tie that into your story, that they're loosening these rules. how does somebody who's working for Hillary, who left the Obama administration, possibly know about surveillance or potential surveillance at Trump Tower and the need to get this information to her friends on the Hill because it might disappear once Donald Trump becomes president? I mean, is there any level of intelligence that everybody didn't have access to at this point? Sarah?
Yeah, well, I think the FBI will probably have a lot of questions for her. And I think that that's very concerning because what we don't know about her is, was she holding onto this TS clearance? Was she still working in some capacity, beyond
she
that?
Was officially out of the administration. She was gone. She was working for Hillary. Last question. Do you think the mainstream media will end up with egg on its face? Here we have Clapper. We have Admiral Rogers, we have Comey all saying it did not impact the election. There's been no evidence of any collusion with the Trump campaign. You guys have reported on that. The media has been going 8 months without any evidence about Russia. Do you think this blows up in the media's face? Real quick, Sarah, and then John.
Well, I think they're definitely going to have to follow down the path of the truth. And eventually they're going to have to get on board with that. And that depends on whether they choose to keep running down a certain rabbit hole or somebody comes out and reveals in Congress or something else and brings closure to this from our stories.
John?
Yeah, listen, I think we're going to look back in some reporting in the last 6-7 months, and it's going to feel breathless and McCarthyite in the limelight. But keep in mind, the investigation goes on, and new things can come to light, and this narrative could change. But the body of evidence today, I think there's been a little bit of breathless and overreacted reporting.
All right. Thank you both. Great work, as always. We'll have you back.